What I thought I'd do here is just sort of run through some of the, some of the issues that we're finding across the portfolio, and it really cuts from, the full spectrum of the, the whole sort of LSM grouping. So we're finding that, in terms of buildings that appoint us, we're getting almost sort of, I'd say sort of two opposite kind of buildings. We're getting the very well-run sort of affluent buildings. And typically speaking, it's a trustee, one or two trustees that are really sort of running it, on a full-time basis, and they are just tired. They're tired and they're 𝗟𝗘𝗧, and they want to stand down, but they know there's no one to hand over to, and they're just very scared to see all their good work undone. So we're getting those buildings that are coming to us where they're wanting to stand down, and then on the other side of the spectrum, it's almost more the sort of the delinquent buildings that finally realize that they're in shit, excuse the French. And they need to do something, they need professional management, to navigate out. And it's no good, I often find, the managing agents might have all the answers, but very often the owners want a third party to repeat what the managing agent says, and then all of a sudden it becomes a good idea. But I do think, and in fairness to managing agents, for the fees that get paid, managing agents are sweatshops. It becomes a bit of a numbers game. You can only give what, you get what you pay for. And sort of average fees don't allow, the sort of the dedicated sort of skill set that the majority of managing agents have, that they kind of split over large portfolios, to make them productive and profitable. But, just the first thing we got is just, people toxicity and politics. So, that ranges across the full spectrum. From affluent buildings, people with money all the way down to, the more sort of delinquent schemes. We find that, and this is nothing I need to tell you guys because I'm sure you see this on a daily basis. So, that is certainly something that seems to be becoming a little bit more toxic now. I think as sort of financial times have gotten a little bit harder and economic conditions a bit tougher, certainly it's becoming quite toxic out there, and the abuse is very real. So, you're not alone. And I think, as an EMA, we almost, and I say it sort of cautiously, almost a glorified managing agent, where, members still think that, we kind of serve them, which we do, but, almost in an unreasonable kind of fashion. Just something we've seen quite a lot of, and I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but we've seen quite a few illegal loans in buildings that we picked up on the EMA side. Which is very unfortunate, actually. It's my strong belief. Finance is a big part of our offering. We've got a finance company. But, it's my belief that finance used correctly unlocks huge value, for a scheme. Generally, when you go to the meetings, or, just work on that point, a lot of the buildings that we take on have got huge maintenance backlogs. I go back to the number of trustees, everyone debating, everyone too scared to make a decision. And, it's just maintenance sort of builds up. They do patch jobs, they don't sort of actually get onto the front foot with maintenance. But, so I think in instances like that, maintenance, finance definitely unlocks huge value. It enables schemes to really get onto the front foot and, to really, get cost of, if one goes via the financial constraints, that you invariably do a patch-up job. But if you're able to utilize finance, you're able to do a far more cost-effective job. Very often it makes sense, and you can speak to the Naba guys, the project-led guys, whoever. But certain scopes go together. And the one I always remember is the scaffolding. If you're putting the scaffolding up, you might as well do every discipline and every scope that needs scaffolding, because it's such a big sort of single cost. But if you've got the financial constraints that don't allow you to do everything, by definition, it's not as efficient. So, back to the illegal loans, we are seeing a lot of them. It is unfortunate, the legislation is quite clear in terms of, what is required to get a loan in. And, I think there's nothing wrong with the loan. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 in debt, and I think used correctly, it does unlock huge value. Also bearing in mind when you go to the meetings, people who can't afford it, obviously shout louder than those that can afford it, to the prejudice of everyone, and then you see the erosion of value. So, our position is that we often utilize finance and special levies together. People that can afford to pay once off up front, or they can do accelerated repayments, that's absolutely fine. But people who need a slightly longer that we put a finance package in place for them, and then they can pay off over an extended period of time. But the important thing is that the project can continue, value is retained, erosion of value is arrested, and everyone gets the immediate benefits of the restoration of value and sort of quality of living and life. So, to me, that is huge. But unfortunately, with the illegal loans certainly that we've come across, trustees and owners are very, very suspicious, about finance, and a lot of our time, on both sides, is just explaining, sort of the benefits. There's finance and there's finance. There's the conventional sort of project finance, which we always sort of refer to as sort of vanilla loan funding, and then there's your levy finance. So they are distinctly different, and I think a lot of the negative, the negative connotations is surrounding the levy finance, and that's typically where debtors are linked to the actual finance, and that is a different animal, and it does need to be understood and used cautiously and correctly. And my advice is that know who you're partnering with, understand the product, and in some instances, quite frankly, there are very few options. Managing agents are then doing cash flow budgets. The few paying owners are sort of bearing the costs of the many, and so anyway, I think it's got a place. And but unfortunately, with the illegal stuff that we see, has left a bad connotation, a lot of suspicion in the market, which is very real. Liability insurance issues. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this. Again, I've got a very affluent building down in 𝗟𝗘𝗧 in Cape Town at the moment. Massive fire risks, massive stability issues with big piers, and just owners completely oblivious, fighting me that they've been standing for 20 years, and there's no reason to address it, which is very interesting. So as I always say to them, it's not a problem until there is a problem. But they're all assuming that there's fire cover, and that there's cover in the event things fall, and that's obviously not the case. And unfortunately, there we've had to bring about applications to compel owners to install fireboards, and just crazy. So a lot of that is linked to maintenance backlogs. So we're seeing a lot of that, and it's just sort of persevering through. And the managing agent there, they've raised some of these issues historically, but I don't believe they have the capacity or the focus, or that they, with respectfully, are strong enough to take it to all the owners. So that's quite interesting, and we're seeing a lot of that. Another scheme which is less affluent, almost the opposite side, up until 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, there the walls are about to collapse. Literally, the walls are shaking. And again, I feel for the owners there, because they're towards the lower LSM group. But what do? We're going to wait for the walls to fall down. And the way they are actually positioned, there's a serious risk to life. So we're seeing a lot of that. And again, it's opposite ends of the spectrum, where they're all fighting me on exactly the same thing. So it cuts right across, sort of the LSM group, which is quite interesting. And that goes to owner pushback as well. And I think, sometimes I question whether it is just a pure sort of affordability issue, because you've got it in affluent buildings that have got the money, and you've got it on buildings that don't have the money. So I'm starting to think that it's just sort of a people thing. So I go back to the people toxicity and sort of politics. It's interesting to see. And then just sort of managing agents' involvement, which is an interesting one. Some of our frustrations are surrounding sort of our partnerships and working with managing agents. We always try and sort of manage the expectation. As I say, we won't perform the EMA function without a third-party managing agent. And I mean, my background is as a managing agent, so I know what it's like. I know it's a thankless job, almost as thankless as ours. I'm not sure, but I know what it's like. And very often when we come in, the initial thing is just making them understand that there's no threat to their position. We never want to change the managing agents. I find it very disruptive, and it's always sort of issues, bank accounts, payments, etc., and then losing that kind of the continuity and the proverbial, memory bank. So we don't like changing the managing agent. So the first thing I often find is that we need to assure them that there's no threat, so that takes however long that takes. And then the second issue is almost, just from a position of practically almost going backwards, which most schemes are, to going forwards at, the speed of light. So it's kind of, guys, this is what we need, this is what we're doing. We don't expect everything sort of like overnight, but you tell us when you're going to get us information, and then let's work forward sort of collectively. So very often just sort of managing that dynamic takes a lot of sort of effort and sort of a little bit of frustration on our sides. But then once it sort of settles down, I think we get into sort of like a good routine, and I think the majority of the managing agents that work with us will understand that it does work well. There are very few sort of after hour meetings. The majority, all of the after hour meetings, are done by ourselves, and we know what we're doing. So there's no sort of a waste of time. Very often we just do the work ourselves because we know how to do it in terms of doing resolutions or doing notices. So we do a lot of work for them. So I think theoretically it increases their capacity, and the idea is that we work to the benefits of a mutual client. To re-establish value and then sort of move forward. It's very often not. I mean, I know the Let's Get Physical last year in this venue. I put up a screen just in terms of almost what we sort of termed a health check, in terms of the different, the different areas that we run through on the take on every scheme, which goes from sort of like financial to checking, sort of tax compliance, occupational health and safety, labour, employment contracts, SARS, etc., etc. So we run through an entire, sort of checklist in terms of, how the scheme is performing. And, again, going back to the managing agents issue, it's not a question of trying to apportion blame or, kind of, sort of highlight them, as being sort of like deficient, but it's a question of just sort of identifying sort of gaps and then sort of working sort of together and progressively to close those gaps. So yeah, I think we do add sort of a lot of value. As an EMA, again, I do think it's a non-brainer. These are businesses that are being run, and I think it's very frustrating for managing agents who very often know, what has to be done, and they're limited in terms of, presenting things, and still waiting then for owners to approve, etc., etc. So but the third party sort of coming in very often sort of bridges that gap, and we can then move sort of constructively forward. At least decisions are made, and we know how to make and do them. Yeah, I think that's about it. It certainly is an interesting space, and we typically find the first, probably on average, probably the first sort of 6 months are quite busy, or very busy, depending, and then generally settles down, and then sort of swings about and roundabouts. But no two schemes are exactly the same. They're all sort of separate animals in their own right. But yeah, I think we add value. I like to think that we add value, and to me, it just sort of professionalizes something that I think needs sort of professionalizing. Yeah, I think that's about it. If there are any questions, we are outside afterwards, myself and the team, and very happy to have a chat. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Michael.